So back in September of last year, Bill Gates sat down with the one and only Oprah Winfrey to discuss AI in a highly televised TV event. And she asked him, Bill, you've been on this tech rocket ship for many, many decades. You've brought us personal computers. You were there when the internet was invented. And now we're in this new AI hype cycle. So what do you think about this AI moment and how it stacks up against where we've been and where we are right now? And he said, this is quite easily the biggest technological advancement in my lifetime. So that's a pretty big thing for somebody like Bill Gates to say, right? He also has said this, not in the same interview, but within the next 10 years, AI will replace doctors and teachers, and humans won't be needed for most things. So those are pretty wild claims, right? It's very exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying. We're at this crossroads of, people promise a lot with AI for a long time. And yet, we are still living in this reality where it's still getting a lot of stuff wrong. It's still doing some really funny stuff. And if you go out and look in, pretty much anywhere online, stats, things like that, there's quite a lot of data showing that the majority of projects and AI projects are still being scrapped. This number is from 2025, from a research project, and they found that this number is actually up 17% from last year. So things are actually getting worse. And we can see this kind of across headlines anywhere that you kind of search online, that more often than not, AI projects are failing. So how can we kind of think about where we are today and where we have to get in the next 10 years if Bill Gates is going to be correct? And so thinking about that vision that he has, we want to talk a bit about this today. So we think that in order to get to this future, we believe that AI implementations today have to start being more grounded in reality and strategy. Businesses need to actually start to evaluate, are we ready for AI? Can we actually implement this as an appropriate solution to our problem before jumping into an implementation? So without doing some of this basic critical thinking up front, we think that we're at risk of continued stifling of innovation. And in past AI hype cycles, we've seen things kind of die off after a bit. So there's a lot of different ways that you can evaluate whether or not you're ready for AI and whether it is the appropriate solution for your problem. But we think that ultimately it boils down to two key things. And that is data maturity and business value. So today we want to show you a framework that we've built that we think assess these two axes. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of why we think these are the ultimate judge of whether or not AI is right for you. But before we do that, who the heck are we and why are we up here talking about this? So my name is Lindsay Murphy. I've spent the bulk of my career in and around working at startups. I've been both a data practitioner, building out data teams, that's what I'm doing now, and building data capabilities. But I've also been on the vendor side, helping customers to do the same. And so I've seen kind of the good, the bad, and the chaotic of what can happen if you sort of just slap Gen AI into data products, and especially when it's done quickly or without kind of a clear plan or use case.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm Colleen Tartow, and I have also spent a lot of time making Lego figures with AI. But I've also spent a lot of time in the startup ecosystem, and now I'm in data engineering leadership at a Capital One, not a startup. But I've been in data for 20-something years, both as a vendor at companies like Starburst and Vast Data, and as a data practitioner leading data engineering, analytics, data science teams, and scaling them. So today we're going to lead you, as Lindsay said, through our thinking on how to judge whether an AI project is viable. And we wanted to make this actionable. We wanted you to walk away with something that you can point to. So we both have extensive experience in the data industry, and we're basing this talk on what we've found as we've worked across various industries and with lots of types of different business stakeholders. I do want to note that while this talk is representing each of our experiences in a variety of roles and industries, it's not reflective necessarily of our current organizations. So with that said, let's get going. Okay, and we love memes. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, buckle up to the memes.
So to start, what is an AI project, right? Why is that important? AI has obviously been around for a while now. Up until recently, it was primarily focused on machine learning and data science, which is really a subset of the overall field of AI as a whole. But now that we've moved beyond ML into generative AI, I think it's important to define what an AI project is, because having that definition to ground ourselves in is critical so that when we talk to executives, they understand what's involved. I want to raise your hand if somebody has said we need to do AI with having no idea what that is. Yes, I know, right? So it's not simple, right, doing AI. There are resources, costs, investments, maintenance, operations, productionizing, potential returns. Like, all of these things are very complex, and it's easy to get caught up in the hype cycle of like looking at folks who are selling like partially functional or quick solutions for AI. But in reality, successful execution of an AI project is really challenging. And as a data leader in particular, it can be daunting because you know what it takes. You know that your data might not be ready for AI. And it's different, especially from anything that we do for BI or machine learning. Like, this is a whole new beast. So what does that look like? Well, with machine learning, just to ground what I'm saying when I mean machine learning, it's focused on mostly labeling data, things like that. So identify and categorize new data. By supervised learning, you also have unsupervised learning, where you're doing things like looking at cluster analysis, that kind of thing. And you're looking for patterns in data, which is incredibly useful. But generative AI, which is how we're defining AI now when we say AI project, the inputs are largely unstructured data, which the volume is a whole new beast. It's, can be like 2,000 times more data. And you've got audio, video, image files, and all that data needs to be tokenized and input into a generative AI model that's going to learn patterns in that unstructured content to generate new content. And that new unique content is the goal, so you can make Lego pictures of yourself. But it's incredibly complex. And so just because the data volumes are larger, that opens up a whole new can of worms. And so the compute power needed is also much larger as well. Training Gen AI models can take GPUs, and that's not something you can just run anywhere. So with Gen AI, you need to think about things like unstructured data, tokenization, vectors. You need vector databases in a different way. And then the models, you're going to infer this new content based on the inputs, but you're going to have things like neural networks and NLP for the GPT type use cases where you're looking at language. And given all of this, how do you make sure that the data organization and the data strategy that you built around structured data, BI, and machine learning can then transition and be mature enough to handle generative AI? As Lindsay alluded to earlier, I do think a lot of the readiness for AI comes down to data maturity. So, sorry. Yeah, you're welcome. So if data maturity is a leading indicator of being ready for AI, well, what is it, right? This has been a bit of a fuzzy thing for a lot of definitions over the years. We talk about data maturity, and I don't think there's one single definition. But it comes down to questions like, is data a first-class citizen at the organization? Is there a focus on data quality, data management, data governance at scale, data products? Is there a culture of data literacy? Do executives actually understand the value and impact of data as both an indirect and direct revenue driver? And being ready for AI is going to hinge on this data maturity. And to paraphrase Stefania, wherever she went, from her talk just before ours, data maturity starts in the early stages of planning, and it's paramount throughout data-driven projects. So if you look at why AI projects fail, we did some research on this, and there seem to be 4 main reasons. The first is poor data quality, which I would say is fundamentally a data engineering challenge. If your data coming in is dirty, garbage in, garbage out. Then we also have to think about things like inadequate risk controls, which is a data governance issue. Without having that proper oversight and policies, AI deployments can lead to biased outcomes, security breaches, compliance violations, very serious outcomes, right? Then we've got escalating costs. Those, I would argue, are deeply rooted in data management inefficiencies. You end up with things like siloed data, duplicated efforts, you don't have clear ownership over your data, and that all leads to cost escalation. And then lastly, we have unclear business value, which stems, I would say, from a weak data strategy. If you don't know what business problems you're trying to solve with AI, this is why when your CEO says, we need to do AI, you're like, to do what? So if you don't know what business problems you're trying to solve with AI and how the data will contribute to that, your project is likely to wander and fail to deliver actual tangible results. So if you look at these first three reasons, they're actually all tied directly to data maturity. Lindsay's going to talk about the business value aspect in just a moment, but data maturity is a leading indicator for AI success because it directly drives quality, governance, cost containment, all those good things. And without those, your AI project will be too risky, too costly, poorly governed, too low quality, et cetera. So just to triple click on this, so to delve down further, like when you're thinking about data maturity, we've actually been talking about this for years. I think it was in 2012, Gartner originally published their analytics maturity curve, and we've kind of riffed with it a little bit here. Now we're mapping the trust in data versus the maturity of the data strategy. And essentially, in less mature data organizations down on the lower left, you've got very little data quality, and therefore trust in data is going to be underdeveloped. But as you rise and go up and to the right, you end up with more proactive involvement of data in the culture and the value of the company. It becomes ingrained in the DNA of the business. And once data is trusted, the strategy is mature, that's when you're ready for things like generative AI. So what this really all boils down to is that data maturity is the power behind all of this. And there's no AI project without high quality, well-governed, well-managed data. So let's say you've got a solid data infrastructure now and you've built that data maturity into your organization. Now what? Let's ask Lindsay.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, we spend a ton of time building mature data infrastructures. But what is that even all for, right? Like, why do we spend time doing all of this? Well, at the end of the day, it's to drive some sort of business value or outcome, right? We're not just here for, maybe some of us are here for the fun of it, but but what that really means, what we really mean by business value is some sort of return on our investment, right? But at this stage in the AI hype cycle, it's very easy for businesses to kind of lose sight of that, right? They're very excited. You want to sort of jump in and try it because everybody's doing it. You've probably been caught up by AI demos that are doing something very cool, but ultimately not scalable, or we find out, months or weeks later that they were faked behind the scenes. Oftentimes, businesses or executives will have a lack of understanding of what it takes to productionize AI. As Colleen showed us, there's lots involved in that. Or there's no grasp really on the scale of costs or risks associated with doing an AI project versus maybe a traditional data project. So if anyone came to my talk last year, you might remember seeing this chart. I've reused it. But when we think about ROI, it's really easy to just break ROI down into value and cost. So if we think about value first, what are all the ways that we can gain value from AI projects? Well, some of those things can be direct financial gains. So that might be, increased revenue. Maybe you slap an AI feature into your product and you start charging people more money for it. Or maybe reduced operational costs. Maybe you're able to automate something or automate some roles internally or remove roles that can be fully automated with AI. Improved business efficiency and productivity. So maybe adding AI to internal workflows to help people get their work done faster and boost productivity. All of those things would be directly potentially hitting your bottom line of a business. On the flip side, you have indirect strategic value. So those might be things like enhanced customer experience from maybe an AI chatbot that does a good job. And improved decision-making from internal stakeholders, so maybe AI is helping to guide them through that process, or faster time to market, maybe AI is helping your product development process to speed things up and speed up your innovation. And lastly, intangible benefits. So those might be the things that are sometimes more difficult to quantify, but are still really important value drivers. So maybe things like improving your brand reputation if you're doing things well, enhanced employee satisfaction, through automation of maybe tasks that you're having them do or things on your product, or maybe even better risk management. On the flip side, we have cost. So cost can sometimes be a little bit easier to figure out than value. But again, we might have direct costs. So those would be things like software licenses or cloud computing resources or specialized hardware if you have to buy your own GPUs, or the data acquisition, cleaning and preparation that's required for an AI project. On the flip side, you might have indirect costs. So, upskilling your data engineering team or adding more people to your team to be able to run these types of projects. Training existing staff, integration with your existing systems, or ongoing maintenance and monitoring of a project once you've deployed it. Hidden costs can be things, maybe project delays or model drift that requires retraining, potential legal ramifications. In our research, we found some very interesting stories Air Canada has been sued by an AI chatbot that like directly it gave a policy statement and then directly contradicted what it said, and someone was able to sue them. They only got like $800, but still, it's like the legal ramifications and potential brand reputation there, right? Opportunity costs of not pursuing other initiatives. Maybe something else would have worked better than using Gen AI as a solution. Some of these things may even be things that directly contradict your company's values. So, environmental or ethical considerations that come up with AI. And lastly, the risks. We heard a little bit yesterday about, in the keynote panel about unknown unknowns and like catastrophic risks for your business. Some of these things can be massive, right? They kind of eclipse the things that we know already, which are very problematic in data problems. So things like data breaches or security issues. These things can be like really far-reaching outside of your business, potentially harmful and impactful to people outside of your business. This was an interesting trend that I've been learning a little bit about. A cute name called slop squatting, which is a new risk that's kind of emerging with LLMs, where malicious actors are actually figuring out that LLMs are commonly hallucinating package names, and they're actually publishing packages under those names. And so this is a pretty inherent risk in using AI, and this kind of a risk for vibe coding. Okay, so we can talk all we want about defining ROI, but it doesn't really matter if you're not actually going to measure it or monitor it. So let's talk a little bit about what is involved in that. And traditionally, data teams are not really very good at this part, right? We're good at doing all the technical stuff. Sometimes we have trouble linking it back to and kind of showing the ROI and the business value. So the first piece of this would be to clearly define the objectives of what it is that you're doing. Like, what are we actually trying to do here? What are we trying to achieve? Much as Steph was showing in her presentation, this needs to be done up front. You don't really want to be thinking about this at the end of the project. So it could be something like improve lead generation by 15% using AI personalization within 6 months, something like that. Once you have your objectives defined, then you can start to define what are the KPIs that I'm going to measure to keep track of this, what are potentially lead measures that might be related to those KPIs. So maybe I'm looking at conversion rates or customer churn or customer acquisition cost, where my outcome KPIs might be things like payback period. How long is it going to take me to recoup the costs of what I've built for my AI project? Net present value is another KPI that might help you to understand the current time value of money. So if I was to look at the future cash and inflows and outflows, and what is the current investment, and is there going to be something profitable there? And lastly, obviously, you have to establish the baseline and then measure. And so benchmarks can be very helpful here, getting a sense of how your actual performance is and tracking this over time, and then comparing yourself to your competitors. Okay. Now let's get into the framework.
Yeah. All right. We've been talking a lot, and I promised you something actionable. So here it is. We're going to put it all together. We've built something we call the AI viability framework. And with this, we are calling out data teams to actually take charge and become or maintain their status as stewards and key stakeholders of AI projects. And we're going to give you this tool because we want to make it easier for people to define and discuss the viability of AI projects at their organizations, and to use it as a discussion tool with your executives or your stakeholders. And so whether you're at a smaller company and you're the data leader and the AI leader, or if you're at a larger company where there's myriad groups working on these things, it's important to understand all of these aspects, but it really does boil down to the two things we're discussing. So let's get into it. So to briefly recap, we discussed evaluating the data maturity of an organization and the business value of any AI program. With data maturity, there are a lot of things to evaluate, like data quality, data governance, et cetera, but you really need to focus on things that are new, like unstructured data and risk controls and cost efficiencies, because those are going to change with the bigger volumes in AI. And then regarding business value, as Lindsay said, having a really good handle on ROI is going to be critical for the success of an AI program. So pay close attention to things like measuring impact, as well as things like staffing, because it's hard to find people to do these things, and also leveraging reusability wherever possible. Okay, so let's plot these two things. So imagine a spectrum of low business value to high business value for your AI project. And then we have an orthogonal spectrum of low data maturity to high data maturity. And this is our our AI viability framework. And so by understanding where an organization and a product a project live on this graph, you can actually quantify its likelihood of success and how to move up and to the right for success. So let's go around and focus on each quadrant. So the bottom left is where you might have a data mature organization. You might struggle to manage and organize your data. You might struggle with data quality. Data governance is often the last thing people do, and so you might have challenges there. And then you might also have a lack of concrete high-value ideas for how to actually implement and use AI to drive business value. If this is you, I would say maybe go back to the basics and focus on data and data maturity while simultaneously researching how AI could potentially help your business. On the bottom right, we have that similar lack of data maturity, but now maybe we have some good ideas for AI projects that would actually be high value. In this case, I would say you should invest in data, but then also consider how that will drive tackling AI so that you'll have that solid driver for your investment in data. Moving to the top left, here we have a data mature organization where things like data management and data governance are in good shape, but maybe you're still struggling with what do AI actually means for you and how to have an actual solid idea for moving forward there. And in this case, you can really continue to lean into your data maturity and then simultaneously really explore the business use cases for AI before you implement anything. And now the top right, the sweet spot, up and to the right, friends. So at this point, if you're up here, you are really ready and ripe for AI data work and advanced data work because you've got a mature data organization and you've got good ideas for AI projects that have significant business potential. And this is where you want to be. Another way to look at this, and I will bow to Gardner for creating this one originally, but is to couple data maturity and AI business value to think about AI maturity. And what we're really getting at in this case is the way to, again, move up and to the right in terms of AI maturity, not just data maturity. And I really like this chart because it actually takes you on that journey. And you're starting that journey to AI maturity in the first phase with just awareness, right? Which is just being aware of what's out there and learning. And this is where we all were, I think in 2023, we were like, what's a transformer? What's an LLM, right? And we're all trying to think of what's possible beyond replacing customer service folks with chatbots. And so, of course, everything in the zeitgeist right now is exciting, but we all fall risk to overhyping when we're in this phase, and so you have to be careful there. And it's important not to get ahead of yourself. As we get more mature, then you can start really experimenting with AI. This is important because this is where you really start thinking about the ROI of AI and understanding what kind of business value can be delivered with this new technology and what it'll take to get there. And then you get to the fun part, which is actually getting AI into production. This can be a significant lift because if you're used to doing BI, this is a whole new beast, right? This is a lot of engineering that you might not have done before. If you've done a lot of machine learning engineering and production in the past, it's likely a smaller lift, but it's interesting how to get there. And then we get to phase 4, where AI has actually become pervasive. And you're at the point where you're building new and disruptive products using AI. And this is actually the North Star for a lot of organizations. But in reality, I would say the goal is phase 5, where AI is actually part of the business DNA, and the business has been transformed for the better by AI. And this is really the North Star of where everybody wants to get. Of course, that transformation is the goal, if Bill Gates is right. And if AI is going to take over a significant volume of human drudge work in the next 10 years, we still have a long way to go. But I think it's safe to say that the majority of companies are still to the left side of this chart. So we're getting there.
All right. So to wrap things up, we want to be clear that Colleen and I are not saying that you should not do AI. We would not be a very popular talk at Data Council if that was our recommendation. So that is obviously not the takeaway here. We completely agree with Bill Gates that, yeah.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, there we go.
We completely agree with Bill Gates that AI will change the world one way or another. So some of the things that we want to emphasize is that there are some important considerations to reflect on before you kind of embark on this journey. So namely, data maturity, as we talked about, and potential business value before diving into AI projects. So to be successful with AI, you must first honestly evaluate your data maturity of your company and think about the past successes that you've had with data. Have things gone well? Have things kind of been gone awry? And maybe you need to go back to that first step and figure out how to get yourself up into that far left top quadrant. Right. Left, right.
Left, right. Up and to the right.
Up and to the right. Next, you need to focus on the realistic and tangible benefits and ROI that an AI project can bring to your organization before really diving in. Is this going to be worth it for you? Next, you want to think about driving alignment internally on the viability of an AI project. Is this something that you can actually pull off? Are you going to be able to get the investment up front that you're going to need to be able to do these things? Is everybody kind of on board? And is it going to be scalable and maintainable? Is it something that your business wants to invest in? And lastly, as data people, we think that we are very uniquely positioned. We're obviously all here at a conference talking endlessly about AI. And so a lot of organizations get very excited about doing this. And so this is an opportunity for us to become thought leaders, if we're not already there in our organizations, to kind of steer them in the right direction. And as Colleen said, if you're at a smaller organization, this might be you leading that conversation. If you're at a bigger organization, that you should be a partner to those individuals who are guiding those initiatives. Okay, and with that, we can move to questions.